Lyra didn't know that the man reading ancient texts in the Forbidden Archives was the Alpha King. She didn't know that he had been searching the entire kingdom for someone exactly like her. And she certainly didn't know that the moment their eyes met across the dusty shelves, her life as a nobody would end forever. All she knew was terror. The Grand Library's clock tower chimed midnight as Lyra shelved the last of the evening returns, her borrowed servant's dress catching on the rough wooden ladder. Tomorrow morning her stepmother would drag her before Lord Blackthorn for a wedding that felt more like an execution. Tomorrow she would become the property of a man whose previous wives had all died under mysterious circumstances. Tonight was her last night of freedom. She pressed deeper into the library's maze of shelves, seeking the hidden passages her father had shown her years ago, back when he still claimed to love her, before the gambling debts, before he vanished into the night, leaving her to his new wife's tender mercies. "Worthless girl," her stepmother had hissed that morning, yanking Lyra's hair as she scrubbed the kitchen floors. "At least Blackthorn will pay good coin for you, more than you're worth." The words still burned. Lyra had spent 3 years believing them, accepting that she was nothing more than a burden to be traded away. But standing in the library's ancient quiet, surrounded by thousands of stories about brave heroines who fought for better lives, something desperate stirred in her chest. She wouldn't go quietly. The restricted archives lay beyond the main collection, protected by locks that hadn't worked properly in decades. Lyra slipped through the gap between 2 towering shelves, her heart hammering as she entered the forbidden section. If the head librarian caught her here, she would lose even this small refuge. But she needed to find the old travel guides, the maps that might show her a way out of the kingdom. Somewhere Blackthorn couldn't follow. Golden lamplight flickered ahead. Lyra froze. The archives should be empty. No one had permission to be here after sunset, not even the senior scholars. She crept closer, peering around a shelf of crumbling mythology texts. A man sat at the central reading table, completely absorbed in an ancient tome. Dark hair caught the firelight, and broad shoulders filled out a simple white shirt that couldn't disguise the power beneath. He turned a page with careful reverence, and Lyra glimpsed strong hands that looked like they could crush stone or cradle something precious with equal skill. He shouldn't be here. She should report him, should run. Instead, she stepped closer. The man looked up. Their eyes met across the forbidden archives, and the world tilted sideways. Heat shot through Lyra's chest, spreading outward like liquid gold, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. The sensation was impossible, overwhelming, and completely beyond her understanding. His eyes were storm grey and devastating, holding hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Something passed between them in that moment, something that felt like recognition even though she had never seen him before in her life. "Oh," she whispered, the sound barely audible. The man's expression shifted. Surprise, then something darker and infinitely more dangerous. Want. Lyra's survival instincts finally kicked in. She stumbled backward, knocking into the shelf behind her. Ancient books tumbled to the floor with thunderous crashes that echoed through the silent archives. "Wait," the man called, his voice rough with something she couldn't name. But Lyra was already running. She fled deeper into the library's heart, using every secret passage and hidden stair her father had ever shown her. Her bare feet whispered across stone floors as she navigated the maze of knowledge, seeking the deepest, most forgotten corner where no one could possibly find her. Behind her, she heard steady footsteps. Not hurried, not loud, patient, impossible. No one else knew these passages. She had been coming here for years, and she had never encountered another soul in the restricted sections. How was he following her so easily? Lyra pressed herself against the cold stone wall in the furthest archive, a tiny room filled with books so old their titles had faded to nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to control her breathing. Maybe he would give up. Maybe he would assume she had escaped through one of the main exits. Footsteps stopped just outside the doorway. "I know you're in there," the man said softly. His voice carried the kind of authority that made her spine straighten involuntarily. "You don't have to hide from me." Lyra squeezed her eyes shut and pressed herself harder against the wall, as if she could somehow melt into the stone itself. This was her sanctuary, her secret place. He couldn't have found her here. It was impossible. Leather Boots stepped into the room. "Nice try," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Lyra opened her eyes to find him standing 3 feet away, hands raised peacefully, but grey eyes intense enough to stop her heart. In the lamplight streaming through the doorway, she could see him clearly for the first time. Beautiful, dangerous, definitely not supposed to be here. "Please don't report me," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I know I'm not supposed to be in the archives, but tomorrow Her voice cracked. "Tomorrow everything changes." Something shifted in his expression. The predatory intensity softened into something gentler, but no less focused. "Report you?" He tilted his head. "Little scholar, I think we're both somewhere we shouldn't be." The endearment made her stomach flutter in a way that terrified her. No one called her anything but servant girl or worthless burden. Certainly no one had ever looked at her the way this stranger was looking at her, like she was something precious he had been searching for. "Who are you?" she breathed. He smiled then, slow and devastating, and Lyra realized she was in far more danger than she had ever imagined. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time to meet you," he said simply. "The question is, who are you, and why are you hiding in my library like you're afraid the world is going to end?" Lyra's breath caught. His library. The golden warmth in her chest pulsed stronger, and somewhere in the distance a clock tower began to chime 1 in the morning. Time was running out. The silence stretched between them like a golden thread, vibrating with possibilities Lyra couldn't name. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee this stranger who had found her secret sanctuary with impossible ease. But something in his storm-grey eyes held her captive, made her forget how to move. "Your library," she whispered, the words barely audible in the ancient quiet. He stepped closer, slow and careful, like he was approaching a wild creature that might bolt. "I spend more time here than in my actual home," he said softly. "These books are better company than most people." The admission surprised her. This man, with his commanding presence and devastating smile, preferred dusty archives to human companionship. "Why?" "Books don't lie. They don't want things from you." His eyes never left hers. They just exist, waiting for someone to discover their secrets. Lyra's heart hammered as he moved another step closer. She should be terrified, should demand answers. Instead, she found herself studying his face in the lamplight, the strong jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the intensity in his gaze that made her feel like the most important thing in the world. "What were you reading?" she heard herself ask. Surprise flickered across his features. "You're not going to demand I explain how I got in here?" "You said we were both somewhere we shouldn't be." She managed a shaky smile. "Besides, I'm more curious about someone who reads ancient mythology at midnight." Something shifted in his expression. Wonder, maybe, or recognition. "The Chronicle of True Bonds," he said quietly. 3rd century texts about fated mates among the wolf shifters. Lyra's breath caught. "I know that collection. I've been translating the damaged sections for Professor Aldrich." She gestured to the shelves around them. "These are the original manuscripts." "You read Old Kingdom?" The question came out rough, almost disbelieving. "My father taught me before he—" She stopped, the familiar pain cutting through her chest. "Before he left?" The stranger's eyes softened. "What does the text say about recognition? The moment when mates first see each other?" Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks. The passages she had translated were explicit about the physical sensations, the immediate and overwhelming attraction that bound shifter souls together, golden threads, racing hearts, the feeling that you had been waiting your entire life for this exact moment. "It says," she whispered, "that the bond feels like coming home to a place you've never been." His breath hitched. "Lyra?" She froze. "How do you know my name?" "Because," he said, stepping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, "I'm Kieran Blackwood, and I've been searching for you everywhere." The world tilted. Kieran Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the most powerful shifter in the realm, the man who could command armies with a single word, who could have any woman in the kingdom with a glance. "No," she breathed, pressing herself harder against the stone wall. "No, that's impossible. You can't be—" "The Alpha King?" He smiled, but there was something almost vulnerable in it. "The same man who comes to this library 3 nights a week because it's the only place where people don't bow and scrape and tell me what they think I want to hear?" Lyra's mind reeled. The Alpha King, here, talking to her like she was someone worth knowing, instead of a servant girl destined for an unwanted marriage. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you even notice someone like me?" Kieran's expression grew fierce. "Someone like you? Lyra, you're brilliant. You're translating texts that scholars twice your age can't decipher. You know these archives better than anyone." His voice dropped to something rough and wondering. "And the moment I saw you, everything in my world shifted." The golden warmth in her chest pulsed stronger, responding to something in his voice. "I don't understand." "Neither do I," he admitted. "I came here tonight because I couldn't sleep. Something was pulling me here, like an instinct I couldn't ignore. And then I saw you, and suddenly everything made sense." Lyra stared at him, this impossible man who was looking at her like she held the answer to every question he had ever asked. "But you're the Alpha King. You could have anyone. Why would you want—" "You," he finished, stepping close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes. "I want to know everything about you. Your thoughts about those texts. Why you're here alone at midnight. Why you looked so terrified when you first saw me." Her throat closed. "Because tomorrow I'm supposed to marry Lord Blackthorn." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kieran's entire body went still, and for a moment Lyra glimpsed the predator beneath the gentle scholar. Power rolled off him in waves that made her skin prickle. "Blackthorn," he said, and the name sounded like a curse. "That bastard who's already buried 3 wives." "My stepmother sold me to pay my father's debts," Lyra whispered. "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." The words came out like a vow, and when Kieran looked at her, his eyes held something that made her heart stop. "You don't have to marry him." "I don't have anywhere else to go. No money, no family who wants me." She laughed, but it came out hollow. "I'm nobody, Your Majesty, a servant girl with too much education and not enough sense." "Don't." The command was sharp enough to make her flinch. "Don't call me that. Not here. Not when you're looking at me like I'm someone worth knowing instead of someone to be feared." "But you are someone to be feared," she said softly. "You could destroy Lord Blackthorn with a word. You could command anyone to do anything. And yet I'm standing here at 1 in the morning, hoping a brilliant woman will tell me more about ancient manuscripts instead of running away screaming." His smile was self-deprecating. "Power doesn't mean much when you're lonely, Lyra." The honesty in his voice cracked something open in her chest. Here was the most powerful man in the realm, admitting to loneliness, talking to her like an equal, looking at her like she mattered. "The texts say," she whispered, "that when true mates meet they recognise each other instantly. Soul calls to soul." Kieran's breathing changed. "What else do they say?" "That the bond is patient, that it waits for both people to be ready." She looked up at him through her lashes. "That it can't be forced or faked or ignored." "And what do you think?" His voice was rough. "Do you believe in fated mates?" Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. The golden warmth in her chest had grown into something that felt like sunlight spreading through her entire body. Standing this close to him felt like stepping into safety after years in the cold. "I think," she said quietly, "that some things can't be explained, only felt." He reached up slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers touched her cheek with devastating gentleness. "Then feel this," he murmured, and leaned down to kiss her. The moment his lips touched hers, the world exploded into golden light. Heat raced through her veins, and something deep in her chest clicked into place like a key finding its lock. This was what the ancient texts described, this overwhelming rightness, this sense of coming home. Lyra kissed him back with desperate hunger, her hands fisting in his shirt as he pulled her closer. He tasted like promises and possibilities, like everything she had never dared to want. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dawn was painting the library windows pale pink. "Stay," Kieran whispered against her forehead. "Don't go back to them. Let me protect you." Reality crashed back. The wedding, Blackthorn, the life waiting for her beyond these walls. "I can't," she breathed, even as her heart screamed at her to say yes. "You don't understand. If I disappear, they'll hunt me down, and when they find me, they'll have to go through me first." The quiet certainty in his voice made her believe, for one impossible moment, that he could actually keep her safe, that someone as powerful as the Alpha King could want her enough to fight for her. But dawn was breaking, and fairy tales didn't last past sunrise. "I have to go," she whispered, and stepped away from the warmth of his arms. His hand caught hers before she could flee. "This isn't over, Lyra. I meant what I said. There's always a choice." She looked back at him one last time, memorizing the way the early light caught in his dark hair, the intensity in his storm-grey eyes, the gentle strength in the hand holding hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making me feel like someone worth choosing." Then she ran, leaving behind the only man who had ever looked at her like she was everything instead of nothing. But as she slipped through the library's hidden passages toward an uncertain dawn, the golden thread in her chest remained, connecting her to the impossible man who had just changed her world forever. Lyra's hands shook as she crept through the servants' entrance of her stepmother's house, praying the pre-dawn shadows would hide her return. The golden warmth from Kieran's kiss still pulsed in her chest, a beautiful ache that made everything else feel like a waking nightmare. She had 3 hours before the wedding, 3 hours to pretend last night had never happened. "There you are, you worthless girl." Lyra's blood went cold. Her stepmother stood at the top of the servants' stairs, still in her nightgown, but with fury blazing in her eyes. Behind her lurked Marcus, Blackthorn's personal guard, his scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice you were gone?" Stepmother descended the stairs with predatory grace. "Sneaking off to delay your wedding? How pathetically typical." "I wasn't—" Lyra started, but the words died as her stepmother's hand cracked across her face. "Don't lie to me." Her stepmother's fingers dug into Lyra's chin, nails breaking skin. "Lord Blackthorn paid good coin for an untouched bride. If you've ruined yourself with some stable boy—" "She hasn't," Marcus interrupted, his voice like gravel. "I followed her. Little mouse just hid in the library all night, reading dusty books like the useless scholar she thinks she is." Relief and terror warred in Lyra's chest. They didn't know about Kieran, but they had been watching her, tracking her movements like she was already Blackthorn's property. "Pathetic," her stepmother spat, releasing Lyra's face. "No matter. The wedding is moved to this morning." Lord Blackthorn grew impatient, waiting. Lyra's heart stopped. "This morning? But you said—" "I said what I needed to say to keep you compliant." Her stepmother smiled, cold and satisfied. "The priest arrives within the hour. You'll be married before you can concoct any more foolish escape attempts." No. The word escaped before Lyra could stop it. I won't do it. I won't marry him. The silence that followed was deafening. Then her stepmother laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You won't? Oh, my dear girl, you seem to have forgotten your place. Her voice turned deadly soft. Your father left us drowning in debt before he disappeared. Gambling debts, drinking debts, the kind of debts that get people killed in dark alleys. Lyra had heard this speech before, but something in her stepmother's tone made her stomach clench. Blackthorne paid those debts, her stepmother continued, circling Lyra like a predator. Every coin your pathetic father owed, in exchange for you. You are payment, girl, a transaction already completed. I'm not property, Lyra whispered, but her voice shook. Aren't you? Her stepmother grabbed Lyra's wrist, her grip tight enough to bruise. You have no money, no family who claims you, no prospects beyond the clothes on your back. What exactly do you think you are, if not a burden finally being disposed of? The words hit like physical blows, each one finding the wounds her father's abandonment had left behind. Worthless, unwanted, a burden to be traded away. But underneath the familiar pain, something else stirred. The memory of storm-grey eyes looking at her like she was precious, the sound of Kieran's voice calling her brilliant. Someone told me, Lyra said quietly, that there's always a choice. Her stepmother's grip tightened. Who told you that? What stable boy filled your head with fairy tales? Before Lyra could answer, Marcus stepped forward. My lord is waiting downstairs, he said to her stepmother. He wants to inspect his bride before the ceremony. The blood drained from Lyra's face. Blackthorne was here, in this house, waiting for her like she was livestock to be examined. Excellent. Her stepmother dragged Lyra toward the stairs. Let's not keep him waiting. Please, Lyra whispered, desperation clawing at her throat. Please don't make me do this. He killed his other wives. Everyone knows it. Accidents, her stepmother said dismissively. And even if they weren't, what do I care? You'll have served your purpose. They reached the parlour where Lord Blackthorne waited beside the fireplace, like a spider in his web. He was a large man, soft from rich living, with pale eyes that lingered too long on Lyra's body. When he smiled, she could see the cruelty lurking beneath the civilized facade. Ah, my bride, he said, his voice oily with satisfaction. Come here, girl. Let me see what I've purchased. Lyra's feet felt rooted to the floor. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Marcus blocked the doorway, his hand resting on his sword hilt. She's a bit skittish, her stepmother said, shoving Lyra forward, but she'll learn obedience quickly enough. Blackthorne reached for her with thick fingers, and Lyra jerked backward. Don't touch me, she gasped. The room went deadly quiet. Blackthorne's pale eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice carried the promise of violence. You will learn respect, wife, starting now. He lunged for her, but Lyra was already moving. Years of dodging her stepmother's blows served her well as she ducked under his grasp and bolted for the window. If she could reach the garden, she might... Marcus caught her before she made it 3 steps, his arms like iron bands around her waist. Going somewhere, little mouse. Let me go. Lyra struggled against his hold, panic giving her strength. I won't marry him. I won't. You will, Blackthorne snarled, stalking toward her. And when the priest pronounces us wed, you'll learn exactly what happens to wives who displease me. Lyra's vision greyed at the edges. This was happening. In minutes she would be bound to this monster forever. There would be no escape, no rescue, no... The front door exploded inward. Wood splintered as the heavy oak door tore off its hinges, crashing to the floor with a sound like thunder. Through the wreckage stepped a figure that made Lyra's heart stop. Kieran. But this wasn't the gentle scholar from the library. This was the Alpha King in all his terrible glory, power rolling off him in waves that made the air itself tremble. His storm-grey eyes had gone molten silver, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone born to command armies. Release her, now. Marcus's grip on Lyra loosened involuntarily, his body responding to the Alpha command before his mind could catch up. Lyra twisted free, stumbling toward Kieran with desperate relief. "Your Majesty," her stepmother stammered, dropping into a clumsy curtsy. "We had no idea. That is, we weren't expecting." "Of course you weren't," Kieran said softly, his gaze fixed on the red marks Marcus's grip had left on Lyra's wrists. "Because you assumed you could abuse my mate without consequences." The word hit the room like a lightning strike. Mate. The Alpha King had just claimed Lyra as his fated mate in front of witnesses. Blackthorn stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "Your Majesty, there's been a mistake. This girl is my bride. I paid good coin." "To whom?" Kieran's voice dropped to something that made every person in the room step backward. "To her father, the man who abandoned her 3 years ago." He looked at Lyra's stepmother, and something in his expression made her go white as fresh snow. "Or to you, a woman with no legal claim to her person whatsoever?" "She lives in my house," her stepmother whispered, "as a servant, not a daughter." Kieran stepped closer to Lyra, and she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Which means any contract you signed is worthless. You sold something that was never yours to give." Blackthorn's hand moved to his sword. "I don't care who you are. I paid for this girl and I'll have her." The temperature in the room plummeted. When Kieran looked at Blackthorn, Lyra glimpsed the predator that lurked beneath his human form. "You'll have nothing," he said quietly, "and if you ever come near her again, I'll make sure your mysterious accidents become significantly less mysterious." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Blackthorn was a powerful lord, but even he wasn't foolish enough to challenge the Alpha King directly. After a moment that stretched like eternity, he stepped back. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes," Kieran said simply, "it is." He turned to Lyra then, and his expression softened into something that made her knees weak. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. The golden thread in her chest was singing, responding to his nearness with an intensity that stole her breath. "Then come with me," he said, extending his hand. "You don't have to stay here another moment." Lyra looked at his outstretched hand, then at the wreckage of the room around them. Her stepmother cowered against the wall. Marcus had retreated to the far corner. Blackthorn stood frozen with impotent rage. For the first time in her life, she had a choice. She took Kieran's hand. His fingers closed around hers with gentle strength, and the moment their skin touched, warmth flooded through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I told you," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "There's always a choice." As they walked through the wreckage of the door and into the morning light, Lyra realized she was no longer running away. She was running toward something, toward a future that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, toward the impossible man who had just turned her world upside down for the second time in 12 hours. The royal court had never seen anything like it. Lyra stood at Kieran's side in the grand throne room, acutely aware that every pair of eyes in the vast chamber was fixed on her. Whispers rippled through the assembled nobles like wind through wheat, and she could catch fragments of their shock. A servant girl? Where did she come from? The Alpha King's mate? The borrowed dress Kieran had procured for her was simple but elegant, deep blue silk that brought out her eyes, but it couldn't disguise her humble origins. Not when she stood among women draped in jewels and cloth of gold, their perfect faces painted with cosmetics that cost more than most people earned in a year. "Breathe," Kieran murmured beside her, his hand warm and steady on her back. "You belong here." Before she could respond, the massive doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Lord Blackthorn strode in, with the confidence of a man who believed the law was on his side, her stepmother scurrying behind him like a nervous rodent. Several guards flanked them, hands resting on sword hilts. The court fell silent. "Your Majesty!" Blackthorn called, his voice carrying across the marble expanse. "I demand justice. This woman has stolen my bride." Murmurs of shock rippled through the watching nobles. To accuse someone of theft in open court was tantamount to calling them a criminal. To accuse the Alpha King was either brave or suicidal. Kieran's expression didn't change, but Lyra felt the temperature drop several degrees. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Explain to me, Lord Blackthorn, how one steals what was never owned." Blackthorn stepped forward, producing a scroll from his coat. "I have a contract, signed and witnessed. This girl was sold to me in payment for debts owed." "Show me." Blackthorn approached the throne with the swagger of a man convinced he held winning cards. He handed the scroll to the court herald, who unrolled it with trembling fingers. "The contract states," the herald read in a voice that echoed off the vaulted ceiling, "that one Lyra Ashworth is hereby given in marriage to Lord Marcus Blackthorn in settlement of debts totalling—" "Stop!" Kieran commanded. The herald fell silent instantly. "Who signed this contract?" "Helena Ashworth, the girl's stepmother and legal guardian." "Legal guardian?" Kieran's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Under what authority?" Lyra's stepmother stepped forward, her face pale but her chin raised defiantly. "By marriage to her father, Your Majesty. When he died, guardianship passed to me." The lie hit Lyra like a physical blow. "He's not dead," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the vast space. Kieran heard her anyway. His head turned slightly, storm-grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. In that gaze she saw a promise that made her believe, for the first time, that someone would actually listen to her. "Speak," he said simply. Every eye in the court fixed on her. Lyra's throat went dry, but Kieran's steady presence beside her gave her strength. "My father isn't dead," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He left 3 years ago, but he's alive. She's not my guardian. She never adopted me. I was just someone to cook and clean while she spent his money." Blackthorn's face flushed red. "The girl lies to escape her obligations." "Silence!" The word cracked through the air like a whip. Kieran rose from his throne, and power radiated from him in waves that made several courtiers step backward. "You dare call my mate a liar in my own court?" The word mate sent another shock through the assembled nobles. Several women looked like they might faint. Lyra felt heat flood her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it, not when the golden bond in her chest was singing with joy at hearing him claim her publicly. "Your Majesty," her stepmother tried again, desperation creeping into her voice. "Surely a man of your stature would want a bride of proper breeding." "Are you suggesting," Kieran interrupted, his voice deadly soft, "that I don't know my own mate when I see her?" The court held its collective breath. To question an alpha's recognition of his fated mate was beyond insult. It was heresy. Blackthorn, apparently too stupid to recognise the danger he was in, chose that moment to speak again. "Contract or no contract, I paid good coin for damaged goods. I demand compensation." The words hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Then Kieran moved. One moment he was standing beside his throne. The next he had Blackthorn by the throat, lifting the larger man off his feet with supernatural strength. His eyes had gone molten silver, and when he spoke, his voice carried the rumble of an approaching storm. "Damaged goods?" Each word was precise, controlled, and absolutely lethal. "You think to describe my mate, the future queen of this realm, as damaged goods?" Blackthorn clawed at Kieran's grip, his face turning purple. "Your Majesty, please, I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't care to know." Kieran's grip tightened. "You saw a woman you thought was powerless and decided she was yours to abuse, just like you abused 3 wives before her." Gasps echoed through the court. The deaths of Blackthorn's previous wives had been whispered about, but never spoken aloud in polite company. "I suggest," Kieran continued conversationally, "that you take your worthless contract and remove yourself from my kingdom tonight." He released Blackthorn, who crumpled to the marble floor, gasping for breath. "And if you ever speak of my mate again," Kieran added, straightening his shirt with casual grace, "I'll ensure your next accident isn't accidental at all." The threat needed no clarification. Blackthorn scrambled to his feet and fled toward the doors, his guards trailing behind him like kicked dogs. But Kieran wasn't finished. He turned to face Lyra's stepmother, who had gone white as parchment. "Helena Ashworth," he said, and his voice carried the weight of royal judgment. "You have committed fraud against the crown by falsely claiming guardianship. You have attempted to sell a person you had no legal right to control, and you have spent years abusing a woman under your care." Her stepmother fell to her knees. "Your Majesty, please!" "You will return every coin Blackthorn paid you. You will surrender any claim to the Ashworth property. And you will consider yourself fortunate that my mate has a kind heart, because if the decision were mine alone, you would be joining Blackthorn in exile." Kieran looked at Lyra then, and something in his expression made her chest tight with emotion. "The choice is yours," he said quietly. "What justice would you have for the woman who made your life miserable?" The court waited. Lyra could feel the weight of their attention, the expectation that she would demand blood for blood. Her stepmother knelt before her, finally powerless, finally at Lyra's mercy, the way Lyra had been at hers for 3 long years. "I want her gone," Lyra said finally. "I want her to live with the knowledge that she bet everything on cruelty and lost, but I don't want her blood on my hands." Kieran's smile was proud and devastating. "Mercy, then. Helena Ashworth, you are banished from court. You have until sunset to leave the capital." Her stepmother scrambled to her feet and fled, leaving only the rustle of her skirts and the echo of her footsteps. In the silence that followed, Kieran turned to face his court. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "Let me be absolutely clear," he said, his gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles. "This woman is my mate, my chosen queen, my equal in all things. Anyone who questions her worth questions me." He stepped closer to Lyra and took her hand in both of his. "She is brilliant, she is brave, she is kind enough to show mercy to those who showed her none, and she is mine, as I am hers, from this moment until the end of time." The golden bond in Lyra's chest blazed like a star. When Kieran looked at her with such fierce pride, such absolute certainty, she almost believed she could be everything he claimed she was. "And now," he said, his voice dropping to something intimate despite the crowd of witnesses, "I believe traditional protocol requires me to kiss my bride." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. "Is that acceptable to you, my queen?" The question was asked quietly enough that only she could hear it, giving her every opportunity to refuse. Instead, Lyra reached up to cover his hands with hers. "Yes," she whispered. When his lips met hers, the court erupted in cheers. But Lyra heard none of it. The golden thread that connected them blazed brighter than the sun, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the impossible man who had chosen her above all others, and who had just declared her worth to an entire kingdom. 2 months later, Lyra still couldn't believe this was her life. She stood in the palace library, her library now, Kieran insisted, watching the morning sunlight stream through stained glass windows that painted rainbow patterns across ancient texts. The shelves stretched 3 stories high, filled with treasures from across the realm, and she had free access to all of it. "You're thinking too loud," came a warm voice behind her. Lyra smiled without turning around, recognizing the footsteps that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "I was just remembering the first time I saw you reading in the archives." Strong arms encircled her waist as Kieran pulled her back against his chest. "You mean when you tried to hide from me by pressing yourself against a stone wall?" "It almost worked," she protested, leaning into his warmth. "It never would have worked." His lips found the sensitive spot behind her ear, making her shiver. I would have searched every corner of this kingdom to find you." The golden bond in her chest pulsed with contentment. 2 months of his patient courtship had convinced her that this wasn't a dream that would vanish with dawn. Kieran truly wanted her, not just as a mate, but as a partner, an equal, someone whose mind he valued as much as her heart. "The council meeting went well?" she asked, settling more comfortably in his embrace. "Better than expected. Your proposal for the scholarship program passed unanimously." She could hear the pride in his voice. 3 new schools will be built in the outer provinces by next winter." Lyra's heart soared. For the first time in her life, she had the power to help others like herself, children whose potential was overlooked because of their birth circumstances. The council really approved the budget. They wouldn't dare argue with their future queen. Kieran's voice carried a hint of amusement. "Especially after you demolished Lord Hartwell's objections with actual literacy statistics." "He had it coming," Lyra said, but she couldn't suppress her smile. The first time Kieran had brought her to a council meeting, she'd been terrified. Now she looked forward to the intellectual challenges, the chance to make real change in people's lives. "That you did." Kieran turned her in his arms so she faced him, and something in his storm-grey eyes made her breath catch. "Have I told you today that I love watching you argue with pompous lords?" "Only twice," she said softly, reaching up to smooth an unruly lock of dark hair from his forehead. "But I don't mind hearing it again." "I love," he said, punctuating each word with a gentle kiss, "watching you put arrogant men in their places with pure logic. I love the way your eyes light up when you find a new manuscript. I love how you've turned this entire palace into a place where learning matters more than lineage." Heat flooded her cheeks. Even after 2 months, his declaration still left her breathless. "Kieran, I love," he continued, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate, "that you chose to stay, that you chose me, despite having every reason to run." The words found the last tender places in her heart where doubt still lingered. There were still moments when she caught herself waiting for him to realize he'd made a mistake, to find someone more suitable for a queen. But they came less often now, especially when he looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never thought to make. "I love you too," she whispered, and watched his entire face transform with wonder. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring 2 months of careful restraint into the contact. Lyra melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as he backed her against the nearest bookshelf. Ancient texts bore witness as the Alpha King claimed his mate with devastating tenderness. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "The wedding is in 2 weeks," he said quietly. "I know." Lyra's heart fluttered with anticipation and nerves. "Are you having second thoughts about marrying a former servant girl?" "Never." The word came out fierce and immediate. "Are you having second thoughts about marrying a man who once destroyed a door to rescue you?" "That was rather dramatic," she admitted, smiling, "but effective." "I'd do it again." His hands cupped her face with reverent care. "I'd tear down the entire kingdom if someone tried to take you from me." The intensity in his voice made her shiver with something that wasn't entirely fear. The protective instincts that made him a powerful alpha also made him a devoted mate, and she was still learning to trust that such fierce love could be directed at her. "The preparations are overwhelming," she confessed. 300 guests, 7 courses, entertainment from across the realm. I keep thinking they're going to realize I don't belong in the middle of such grandeur." "You know what I think?" Kieran's thumb traced her lower lip with maddening gentleness. "I think we should have 2 ceremonies." Lyra blinked up at him. 2? One for the kingdom, all the pomp and pageantry they expect from a royal wedding. His smile turned soft and private. "And one for us, just you and me, somewhere that matters." "Like where?" "Like here." His gesture encompassed the library around them. "Where we first met, where I first knew you were everything I'd been searching for." Tears pricked her eyes. After a lifetime of being told she was nothing, having someone want to pledge himself to her in the place where she'd felt most herself was almost too beautiful to believe. "You want to get married in a library?" "I want to marry you," he corrected. "The location is just details." Before she could respond, a discreet cough echoed from the library entrance. They turned to find Marcus, Kieran's personal guard, not the brute who'd worked for Blackthorn, but a different man entirely, standing at respectful attention. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. Lady Catherine requests an audience with both of you regarding the wedding arrangements." Kieran sighed. "Tell her we'll be there shortly." Marcus bowed and withdrew, leaving them alone again. Kieran looked down at Lyra with rueful affection. "Duty calls?" "Always does." But he made no move to leave, instead studying her face like he was memorizing it. "Are you happy, Lyra? Truly?" The question was asked quietly, but she could hear the vulnerability beneath it. Even the Alpha King needed reassurance sometimes. "I used to think happiness was for other people," she said softly. "I thought I was meant to be invisible, forgotten, grateful for whatever scraps of kindness came my way." His expression darkened. "And now? Now I wake up every morning next to a man who thinks my mind is as beautiful as my body. I spend my days planning schools and libraries that will help children who remind me of myself. I'm going to be queen of a kingdom where intelligence matters more than inheritance." She reached up to touch his face, marvelling that she was allowed such intimacy with someone so powerful. "So yes," she whispered, "I'm happy, impossibly, completely happy." His kiss was soft and reverent, a seal on the promise they'd been building for 2 months. "Come on," he said finally, taking her hand. "Let's go convince Lady Catherine that we don't need ice sculptures shaped like swans at our reception." "We don't? We don't." His grin was boyish and devastating. "I was thinking more along the lines of a chocolate fountain shaped like a book." Lyra laughed, the sound echoing off the library's vaulted ceiling. "Now you're just being ridiculous." "I'm being practical. If we're going to feed 300 people, we might as well do it with style that reflects our priorities." As they walked toward the library doors, hands clasped and hearts full, Lyra caught sight of their reflection in one of the tall windows. A confident woman in royal blue silk walking beside a man who looked at her like she hung the stars in the sky. She barely recognized herself, but she loved who she was becoming. The girl who used to hide in shadows was gone, replaced by a woman who stood in the light beside her mate, and equal. And for the first time in her life, Lyra knew without doubt that she was exactly where she belonged. In 2 weeks she would be queen. But today she was simply a woman in love, walking through a palace library with the impossible man who had taught her she was worthy of everything her heart had ever dared to want. The morning light streaming through the palace library windows felt different somehow, softer and more golden than usual. Lyra stood among the familiar shelves in her wedding dress, ivory silk that caught the light like spun moonbeams, and marvelled at how much had changed since that terrified girl had first pressed herself against these very walls. Today she would become queen. "I thought I'd find you here," Kieran said softly from the doorway. Lyra turned, her breath catching at the sight of him in formal royal attire. Deep blue velvet brought out his storm-grey eyes, and the circlet resting on his dark hair proclaimed him what he'd always been, a king. But when he looked at her, she saw the gentle scholar who had offered her safety in the darkness. "Nervous?" he asked, crossing to where she stood beside their favourite reading alcove. "Terrified," she admitted with a shaky laugh. 300 of the most powerful people in the realm are waiting for me to walk down that aisle without tripping over my own feet. They're not waiting for perfection, love. They're waiting to witness something extraordinary." His hands found hers, steady and warm. "The moment their king claims his queen." "I still can't believe this is real," she whispered. 6 months ago, I was hiding in these stacks, convinced I was nothing. Now you're about to become the most beloved queen this kingdom has ever known." His voice carried absolute conviction. The woman who will build schools and libraries, who will make sure no child ever feels worthless because of where they were born. Tears threatened to spill over. Kieran, before we face that crowd, he said quietly, I want to give you something that's just ours. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a slim volume bound in midnight blue leather. Open it. Lyra's hands trembled as she opened the cover. Inside, written in Kieran's careful script, was a single page of text. Lyra, she read aloud, her voice soft with wonder. You came to me hiding in shadows, convinced you were meant to be invisible. But you were never invisible to me. From the first moment I saw you, you blazed like a star, brilliant, beautiful, and absolutely impossible to ignore. Today, I promise you this, you will never have to hide again. You will never doubt your worth again, and you will never be alone again. I am yours, as you are mine, from this moment until the stars forget how to shine. All my love, Kieran. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression that stole her breath. That's my real vow, he said, the one that matters here where we first found each other. And this is mine, she whispered, reaching up to cup his face. I promise to stand beside you as your equal, not behind you as your shadow. I promise to use the voice you helped me find, to speak for those who have none. And I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion you've shown me, completely, fearlessly, forever. When he kissed her, soft and reverent in the golden morning light, it felt like the most sacred ceremony imaginable. Ready to go make it official, he murmured against her lips. With you, I'm ready for anything. The royal wedding was everything the kingdom expected, and more. The cathedral blazed with candlelight and filled with music that soared to the vaulted ceiling. Noble houses from across the realm bore witness as Lyra walked down the aisle in her ivory silk, her hand steady on Kieran's arm. But her favourite moment came during the vows, when Kieran's voice rang out clear and strong. I take you, Lyra, brilliant and brave, kind and precious beyond measure, to be my queen, my mate, my equal in all things. And when it was her turn, I take you, Kieran, who saw worth in a girl the world had forgotten, to be my king, my heart, my home. The kiss that sealed their union brought thunderous applause from the assembled crowd, but Lyra barely heard it. All that mattered was the golden bond blazing between them, stronger now than ever before. The reception that followed was a blur of congratulations and well-wishes. Even her step-family had been permitted to attend, a gesture of forgiveness that Lyra hoped might heal old wounds. Her stepmother kept her distance, but her half-sisters approached with nervous smiles and genuine apologies. We should have protected you, the elder one whispered. We're sorry we were too frightened to stand up to Mother. The past is the past, Lyra replied gently. What matters is the future we choose to build. But her favourite part of the entire day came when the formal dancing ended, and Kieran led her back to the library for what he called the real celebration. There, surrounded by books and bathed in firelight, they shared their first dance as husband and wife to music only they could hear. No regrets? He asked as they swayed together in perfect harmony. Only one, she said, smiling up at him. His expression grew concerned. What? I regret that it took me so long to realize I deserved this happiness. His relief was palpable. Well, we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time. And they did. 5 years later, Queen Lyra stood in the children's wing of the Royal Library, watching her 3-year-old daughter Emma toddle between the specially sized shelves with determined focus. The little girl had inherited her father's storm-grey eyes and her mother's love of books, along with a mischievous streak that kept everyone on their toes. "Mamma, look," Emma called, pointing to a particularly tall shelf. "Books go up to the sky." "Not quite to the sky, sweetheart," Lyra laughed, her hand resting on her rounded belly where their second child grew. "But close." She was settling into a reading chair when Emma suddenly vanished behind a row of picture books. Lyra waited for her to reappear, but when several minutes passed in suspicious silence, maternal instinct kicked in. "Emma," she called, "where are you, little love?" No answer. Lyra rose and began searching the children's section systematically, checking behind chairs and under reading tables. Finally, she spotted a telltale flash of golden curls tucked into the narrow space between two bookcases. Emma had pressed herself against the wall, exactly as Lyra had done all those years ago, giggling softly at her own cleverness. Lyra's heart swelled with love and memory as she approached her hiding daughter. "Nice try, little love," she said gently, reaching into the gap to lift Emma into her arms. Emma dissolved into delighted giggles. "I was hiding like you did, Mamma. Papa told me the story." "Did he now?" Lyra kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of childhood and possibility. "And what happened in Papa's story?" "The prince found the princess, and they lived happily ever after," Emma declared with 3-year-old certainty. "That's exactly right," came Kieran's warm voice from the doorway. He crossed to them with quick strides, gathering both his girls into his arms. "Though I prefer the version where they lived brilliantly ever after." "Brilliantly?" Emma looked puzzled. "It means," Lyra said, settling against her husband's familiar warmth, "that they used their love to make the whole world brighter." As if to prove her point, late afternoon sunlight streamed through the library windows, painting everything in shades of gold. Emma chattered about her favourite books, while Kieran's hand found Lyra's, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. Looking around the library, their library where it all began, Lyra marvelled once again at the turns her life had taken. The frightened girl who had once hidden in these very stacks was gone, replaced by a confident queen, a loving wife, a devoted mother, and an advocate for every child who had ever felt invisible. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked softly, recognizing the expression on her face. "Just remembering," she said, squeezing his hand, and being grateful. "For what?" "For a man who saw worth in a hiding girl, for a love that turned out to be real, for a life that turned out to be more beautiful than any story I ever read in these books." Kieran's kiss was soft and full of promise. "The story's not over yet, my queen." "No," Lyra agreed, watching Emma arrange her picture books with serious concentration. "I think the best chapters are still to come." And so they were. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Lyra and Kieran's story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering doubt, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these stories. Thank you for joining me in the library where it all began, and I'll see you in the next adventure.